We ready? Alright. So, the title, Confessions of a Student Lost in Translation. Education is most commonly known as giving or receiving systematic instruction. And education involves a diverse curriculum that challenges students to solve problems, to think critically, and to learn skills that may be useful in life and or future learning. We see education as a process that builds skills, but how often do we look at education as influencing our values? What values are we taught in school, and why are those values emphasized in our educational system? Growing up, I was taught that education is the silver bullet for the world's problems. For 6 years, I attended a strict Jewish day school where Bible study was taken as seriously as math and science. Here's the fun part. For those of you who went to Catholic school, just think theology class and add a lot more guilt. The Old Testament preaches that it's important to ask questions and to challenge authority. The book encourages youth to learn how to read and write so that they can interpret the text for themselves. I kind of use this as an excuse, so when I got in trouble at school, the idea of challenging authority and questioning my elders was often my way of explaining my rambunctious behavior. I'm only trying to fulfill what the Bible asks me by, questioning authority. That's what we're supposed to do, aren't we? You don't have to feel guilty. You can laugh at that. On a more serious note, however, schooling was hard from 1st to 6th grade. I struggled in a classroom with 25 type A personalities fighting for the teacher's attention. My grade had 130 students, but sometimes it felt like 300. I was not at the top of my class, nor was I at the bottom, but I was sandwiched in between, and was always passed on to another teacher who would, again, complain about my behavior to my parents. So, sure, I was the class clown and quite the cocky kid, but I relied on my humor because it was the only way that I could get attention from my teachers. The dark days of my primary school education helped influence my once dogmatic view of education. I was always taught that I needed high grades in order to qualify for high-level classes. High-level classes would give me a good resume, and that would help me get into the best middle schools. This is 6th grade, and I was already concerned about GPA. That's not right. So, since I was little, every Jewish holiday my family celebrates has a story, and behind each story is a lesson. And the common theme, the general idea of the themes behind each of these lessons is that educating every generation is very, very important, and eventually it gets ingrained in your head. We may not be the biggest people, but we're taught that we can make up for it through education. Have any of you ever heard of tiger moms? Yes. Yeah? Alright, what about Jewish tiger moms? Kosher tiger moms? No? It's the Jewish equivalent. So, I grew up with the phrase, I hope my son becomes a doctor, or better yet, a lawyer. My professional path was already laid out for me, and all I needed to do was keep my grades up and my relationship with my parents stable. If you don't believe the stereotype, ask me or my mother. Here we go. 2 out of my 4 grandparents are doctors. 3 out of my 5 uncles are doctors. 2 out of my 6 aunts are also doctors. The numbers may not be too convincing, but they definitely had an influence on me. So there's a bit of my background and how I came to shape my own opinions on education and its importance for success. While my concept of respect and appropriateness were far from matured, I came out of private school with the hardened belief that education leads to success, and success meant being a doctor or a lawyer with a big salary. Success also meant making your Jewish mother proud, which, for those of you who don't know, is to become a lawyer or a doctor. So the first idea that challenged my belief that education was the silver bullet was that only a highly educated person can achieve a successful career and a high salary. In China, we were farmers. We would hoe, plant, pick, and sow seeds, toiling in the hissing winter wind for less than 2 hours a day. We were skilled laborers, kind of, and I was excited to pretend to be a farmer. I came to the consensus during the organic farming unit in China that farmers are exploited worldwide and get paid very little for what they do. Exploiting people is obviously a bad thing, but I wasn't sure how they could consider themselves successful when They could not afford the amenities that I have. Isn't being a farmer considered an unsuccessful profession because it doesn't require an education? I grew up as a city boy, so my view of farmers was skewed by Hollywood portrayals of picturesque farmers being simple-minded, not being able to afford education. Summer vacation was only added to the American traditional school system so students could go home and come back after the harvest. Our country, however, moved away from farming and began to urbanize. So I was caught in the middle, trying to understand why anybody would want to move backwards. I didn't understand why people would choose to be a farmer over a multitude of higher-paying professions. Unlike a farmer, I wanted to be successful, and I believed that success would make my family and I happy. And success led to happiness, and happiness at that time meant a Vineyard Vines wardrobe and a jet ski. How could I afford to be happy without being successful? That was the real question. In China, I was familiar with the phrase, money doesn't buy happiness. But it definitely helps. I mean, have you ever seen anybody frown on a jet ski? No. The point is that during my time in China, becoming a highly educated professional was a key way for me to find success, aside from happiness. The point is, I couldn't see the other side of the picture. I thought that salaries were based off the difficulty of one's work and the years spent studying. Therefore, of course, it makes sense that a doctor earns more than a carpenter. We're later asked a journal on this question, should farmers be paid more? And at first, I was confident in my answer that no, they aren't educated, and therefore do not deserve more money. The problem with the statement I made was that farmers don't need a traditional education to do what they do. And that doesn't mean that that their work is easy or they shouldn't be rewarded. I was assuming that education should be the determinant of one's salary. Again, I was challenged by having to define what education meant. I was then led to a conclusion that not everyone wants to live the way that I do, and therefore our way of education doesn't apply to everyone, and can in fact encourage people in negative ways to give up their culture. They can be taught to want things like a flat screen TV or Jersey Shore. But my understandings of education had taught me to view success as becoming rich and earning a high degree in university. I started to think that education was used as the way to mold people to our way of life and create desires that were non-existent before. And so this struggle began and continues today. After my initial assumptions were challenged, I wanted to take a step further and understand how and why our society chose to reward and respect those that are traditionally educated over those that study trade and skilled labor. Does society respect traditional education over trade because it wants more lawyers and carpenters? I didn't and still don't understand why we encourage traditional education and look down upon trade skills when we need both equally. Even on a professional level, there are scenarios that don't make sense. Why do we pay those that teach people to be successful so little when those that are taught earn exponentially more? Teachers in Finland, for example, require the highest grades in school, a rigorous postgraduate training experience, and a passion for learning. Teachers in Finland are also paid very high wages in comparison to American teachers. It's almost as if we want fewer teachers by paying them so little and not giving them the respect that they deserve. Teachers, if paid and respected, could potentially have the power to inspire youth, to stay out of trouble, to keep a strong work ethic, and to work hard, which would make the jobs of police officer, DEA investigator, and doctor a lot easier. If education is so important in our culture, then why don't we change the current system so that passionate teachers can teach without the need to get a second job and or worry about the bills? It just doesn't make sense to me. Now try to conceptualize a world where people on Wall Street are paid the same as school teachers. I know it's tough. With a high salary, more people would be willing to become teachers, and therefore we could raise the caliber of our teachers, doing far more good than another class of investment bankers. No offense if anybody is an investment banker here. Another example of this illogical divide is between the nurse and the doctor. I understand being a doctor requires a life of commitment and training, but becoming a nurse is no easy task either. Nurses also have to go to school and train, but nurses, unlike doctors, have much more power to heal through care and kindness, rather than relying on medicine. Nurses spend hours trying to make their patient feel comfortable, and they make the doctor's job a hell of a lot easier. When comparing the importance of professions, it all boils down to the fact that we as a society need skilled laborers and doctors and lawyers equally. One profession is not better than the other, but both fulfill different purposes, and both are needed to maintain a productive society. While the jobs may require different skills, each practice has its difficulties and requirements. If I recognize this, then why do I place more credibility on the CEO than the classroom teacher? Moving on to India, my insight of the dangers of education expanded thanks to the help of my friend and 20th century philosopher Paulo Freire. Freire was a philosopher that taught liberation education. Now, liberation education is this way of using the Socratic method in order to help students come to their own conclusions. Another general tenet of liberation education is that students should not be learning in a style of banking education where the teacher deposits knowledge in me. It's rather more dialectical reasoning and discussing and critically analyzing different subjects. And Freire brings up the point that education, when controlled by the elite, is used to perpetuate a system of oppression. Education is therefore used to justify the divisions within society. So, if education is taught to lead to success, then people will want to be educated. And being educated means giving up one's core definition of success and subscribing to the elite's point of view. And the hardest challenge when confronting my dogmatic reasoning around this education was this idea that those who are uneducated are useless. And that is very, very harsh, and I understand, and I don't appreciate the fact that I believe that, but I couldn't understand how you could help develop society without an education. But yet again, do we know what education means? Education may lead to opportunity, but if you're ahead of my thinking, maybe you disagree with the system of education because of the values it teaches. Maybe you don't want to be a part of the conditioning. Maybe you just don't want to sell yourself to a certain value system. People can be educated in ways aside from traditional schooling, but we often fail to recognize or qualify those alternative ways of learning. We're conditioned to believe in the traditional way and look down upon other approaches. Take TBB's curriculum, for example. TBB adopts Freire's concept of dialectical learning, where students and program leaders challenge the curriculum together in an interconnected learning process. Unlike most schools, students lead discussions and are encouraged to question the program leaders and their views. TBB was able to address the problems that I faced in school, boredom and irrelevance to my life, by presenting the information through various media types, such as TED Talks, acting skits, and speakers. The curriculum is designed to keep the students engaged, rather than to prepare us for a test or evaluation. The key difference between school and TBB is that TBB does not evaluate us and prepare us for a means to an end, but rather focuses on the process that we go through, and the end is just a result. While universities won't award college credit from the TBB curriculum, I probably learned more about the world and about myself in 6 months than I may in the next 4 years and $200,000 in debt later. The values don't add up. The way that we are conditioned to believe that traditional education is best affects the way that we define success, and in turn affects the way that we view alternative systems of education. And so we are taught to look down upon alternative systems, I believe, as a way to maintain the status quo. And for the longest time I failed to acknowledge any other educational system aside from my own, and aside from the traditional schooling system. I made fun of liberal arts, lovey-dovey education. Ironically, I was a student within that system, and I failed to see how incredible the alternative learning can be. A key takeaway from my global gap year is that the means to learning can teach much more than the end result. The end is the means, if that makes sense. Maybe learning from a tribal chief or village elder can teach more than a textbook can. We can only judge learning through our experience, because that is the only ground that we have. And one way of learning is not the only way. When considering these restrictions that exist in professional society, we cannot fail to notice the barriers of entry are based off a multitude of factors that are unreasonable and outdated. Not only is the education you receive important, but also the type of education and where you get it. Grandpa. it's good, I can drink water. All right. So I could study plumbing for years, yet our culture would not place the same value on plumbing because it's not considered to be a high step on the professional ladder. The issue that I came to wasn't my definition of success, but rather the way I'm using an education to justify the professional meritocracy that our society worships. The longer the acronyms behind your name, the more money you should make. The more years devoted to education, the more respect you deserve. But should education be used to justify how much respect someone deserves? Why can't a trash collector or construction worker discuss their profession without worrying about criticism? The only logical reason that I could see was that social institutions choose to use education as a way to organize society between the powerful and the powerless. The division can have an impact on society in both a micro and macro level. On a micro level, education can be used to justify elitism and look down upon those that lack the same training. On a macro level, education can be used to preach consumerism and help stimulate an economic system that benefits those in power. While education can be used to structure society, it can also be used to keep professional hierarchies relevant. After my opinionated spiel on how our education system needs to change, and the dangers of education, you're probably wondering, what do I suggest? I believe that our values when educating need to shift towards the process rather than the end result. I believe we should fight our prejudice against those who do not agree or do not have the same opportunities to be traditionally educated. And I encourage all of you to think about the education you received and how it may have influenced your values. After all, I don't believe that one generation is better or less able than the other. I would argue, however, that the education system is evolving, and with that, the values of consecutive generations. I would like everyone to think about how your understanding of education influences the way you view success. Professional meritocracy, and a divide between the educated and the undereducated. Why do we place such values on education when at the same time that value can denigrate those in society without one? You tell me. Thank you.